Hi again, everybody. This is your Week 7 video tutorial for those of you in FAS 202. We're going to be looking at your final paper, some key elements and reminders for it. And just a reminder, there is a separate video for those of you in FAS 201 for your final paper. So this particular video is going to focus on you guys in FAS 202. Your final paper, the bulk of your paper, hopefully at this point in week 7, is done and just needs a lot of maybe some revision and some polishing and so forth. There are some new elements in the paper too, but as you'll note here as I go through the different key elements, many of them we've already talked about, of course, when you were working on milestone 2, the rough draft of your paper. But then towards the end, I'll talk about some of the new elements to make sure you have included. So, of course, your introduction, your introductory paragraph, where you present your two main works of art for the paper. These are your two historical works of art, and you want to present them with their full identification details that are required. Again, look at your grading rubric for what those details are. You need more than just the artist and the title and the date. You need more identification in there. Then by the end of your introductory paragraph, you want to present your thesis statement where you talk about that thematic connection, what those two main works of art have in common as far as a theme goes. That's sort of the why behind your comparing these two works. And you want to give us an idea of what that contemporary connection is going to be later in your paper. So by the time your reader gets to the end of this first paragraph, he or she should know very clearly and without a doubt what your two main works of art are and how they are connected in terms of a theme that links them together, and then how you're going to bring that theme and all the ideas that you've talked about throughout your paper into the present day with your contemporary connection at the end of your essay. The second section of your paper is where you really dive into each of your works of art in detail. You're going to do your visual and historical analysis here of each work, where you are giving us a good, clear, visual and formal description of both works of art, as well as a discussion of how they fit into their respective time periods or styles or eras. And as I mentioned in milestone 2, this is a good place to think about looking at each work of art one at a time. So spend a good paragraph or two at least on work of art number 1 and give us a good clear visual description, talk about it in terms of what its style is, what time period it came from, what sort of forces were happening around the period in which it was created, and then move on to another section where you look at work of art number 2 and do anything there. So you move through them one at a time here to give your reader a good clear picture of both works of art before you jump into your comparison and contrast section. Here's where you do some of that back and forth after you've established a good clear image of your works of art beforehand. So you're going to talk about how each work of art reflects that common theme in similar ways as well as in different ways. So again, you've got two works of art that are very different. They're from different time periods, different styles. So they're going to look at that theme in very different ways, and you want to discuss how they do so in this section here. Remember that in sections 2 and 3, this is the body, the bulk of your paper really. You want to bring in your research and your specific details here. So you want to look at particular elements of your works of art, really zoom in on particular details, and this is where you want to show off your understanding of the concepts that we've talked about throughout the term. So your understanding of those terms and vocabulary ideas in MindEdge, as well as bringing in your research here to support it. The fourth section of your paper is when you kind of bring things up into the present day, and your rubric looks at it as contemporary parallels. This is how your two main works of art connect to a current example today, an idea we can see in the world today, and how that theme is still relevant today. So it's sort of whether you've chosen a specific physical of art for this section, or you're looking at a more general social construct or social phenomenon. Regardless of what that is, you're bringing those ideas that you've discussed up to this point into the present day to show how this theme is still relevant and present around us today. Then the fifth section, this is your conclusion. This is the part that was not due in milestone 2, although I know we talked about the possibility of going ahead and giving it a stab, go ahead and looking at it back then to get some feedback from your instructor. But if you didn't, make sure you do include your conclusion here. The reason I point this out is because by the time you get through that fourth section there, your contemporary parallel, it can sort of feel like you have already wrapped up your paper because you're sort of bringing it up into the current day, and it does sort of feel like a conclusion in its own sense, but it's not. You need to include a separate conclusion portion of your paper. Again, look over your rubric and see what all is required in that section. But this is part of a overall reflection of, what can we learn? You're asked in this section to think about the bigger picture, how art and artistic expression over time can shape, can challenge, and help us understand our own notions and behaviors in the world we live in. So it's sort of a big picture reflection here that happens at the end of your paper. And in this section, you also want to reiterate your thesis and summarize the main points of your paper again. So it's a nice sort of bow to tie up your paper overall here at the end. And it is its own separate graded portion of the paper too, so do make sure you complete that conclusion portion and you don't just stop your paper after that fourth section of contemporary parallels. Some final paper reminders, research and reading, like I mentioned before, especially in the body of your paper, make sure you do apply that terminology, vocabulary, and the concepts that you've been exploring and learning about throughout the course. So this is your opportunity to show off your understanding of MindEdge and the modules you've worked on from week to week. You also want to bring in your required research and citations, so the required number of citations as well as the required number of sources in your paper, and use those to support your points effectively. Make sure you have credible, reliable, and scholarly sources too. So as always, no Wikipedia, no questionable web sources that are out there. As I mentioned before, you can never go wrong with finding sources through the Shapiro library. You know that the sources in that database are going to be good, solid sources. But if you have any question about any sources you might have chosen, don't hesitate to check with your instructor or with one of the librarians on call at Shapiro to make sure your research is solid. Proofread, of course, as always, no matter how wonderfully supported your paper is and well organized it is, if it's filled with typos and spelling errors, it's going to undermine all of that. So do more than just running a spell check. Go through and reread your paper, have someone else read your paper, read it aloud. Look for both those small elements as well as larger elements. So make sure your formatting is correct as far as italicizing titles of artworks, capitalization, punctuation, all that stuff is correct, as well as a general overall clarity for your paper. So that your sentences are correctly structured, your paragraphs flow nicely from one to the next. Again, your rubric walks you through a good outline of how your paper should progress overall, but you also want to make sure those different sections flow together correctly and have good transitions between them. Good old MLA, of course, make sure your overall paper is formatted properly in MLA, as well as those parenthetical citations in your text and your works cited list at the end of your paper. Still have questions about MLA or anything that has to do with the writing of your final paper, remember all the resources that are available to you, including the Exploring the Humanities Learning Community site, Shapiro Library, the 24-hour library assistance there, the SNU Online Writing Center, where you can submit your writing to get some feedback. And I also included the Purdue Online Writing Lab resource, which is another helpful source to kind of give you some MLA support if you need it.